Welcome back to the Entrepreneur's Cut. I'm your host, Rachna Dayal, and today I have the pleasure of bringing to you a very distinguished guest speaker. Our guest today has had an amazing career. He has been the CEO of TSI Semiconductors. He has been the VP of Business Development at TSMC, and he has also done a stint as an operating partner of Khosla Ventures. And currently, he is an angel investor in many startups. He's a strategic advisor to many startups and is on the advisory board of incubators as well. Please welcome Sagar Pushpala. Hi, Sagar. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for taking time to share your journey with us.
I'm happy to be here, Rachna. It's a pleasure. So thank you.
Thank you. Sagar, so tell us a little bit about yourself. How would you describe yourself? And share your entrepreneurial journey with us. And how do you actually connect, or how did you connect the dot across your entire journey?
Thanks, Rachna. Let me go back in time a little bit and we get some context to how the dots kind of connect. You tend to look at the dots only after they're put together. So let me just start off. So I come from a very middle-class family. Most of our family members are either the traditional engineers, doctors, lawyers. So there's hardly any entrepreneurial bone in the extended family. So I took the very first step when I left the country to come to the US for my graduate. So I moved 3 or 4 different majors in school as well. So that's the other part. So even though I was in engineering, I moved from electrical engineering to chemical engineering to petroleum engineering. And which tells you, as I go through my journey, I think all these kind of come together. It's the way I think, it's the way I kind of piecemeal and put things together. So once I finished my graduate school, my very first role was a night shift job at a large semiconductor company. So I stayed on to my core of chemical and petroleum engineering and going into wafer fabrication plants and how all the chemical engineering aspects of all that came together. So during all this, it was very clear for me that eventually I'd like to go into a general operating role rather than be a hardcore engineer. I started to quickly gather skills to understand how operations work. So as I moved roles over the many years from large to small companies, it's literally every 2 cycles of learning for me, I have to do something different. A lot of folks tend to be in a role and they continue to stay in roles and actually get better and move up the ladder. If I go through 1 cycle, I get about 30-40% learning. By the time I go to the second cycle, I only got 10% to learn. I'm going to move on. So essentially, if you notice my career, every 4 or 5 years, I moved on. So you can tell all aspects of this is engineering to operating roles is where I found the niche. And in the midst of all this stuff, I started to get into investing. And I started to focus on investing in 2 areas primarily. One in real estate, things I don't know anything about, and the second in technology companies. So you can tell I was trying to stepping out of my comfort zone, and I'm absolutely comfortable being uncomfortable. In an operating role, when you have to go produce millions of units and you don't know where the end is, trying to bring all the pieces together. And actually, it's a chess game of figuring out which move to make first and which second. So all these together make me think a little different than a traditional corporate manager. So hopefully that kind of puts things in perspective.
It does. And 2 things come to mind. One is curiosity, because you have to be curious to want to do new things, right? And the second is learning agility. And these are often underestimated skills of leadership. So you've done something very unique, right? You have worked as the operating partner in a VC firm. Describe a little bit your experience and what were the key learnings in that particular stint?
Thanks, Rachna. So, it's interesting, again, put a little perspective as to why I got into a venture capital kind of role. I got fairly high up in the corporate ladder, and I think there was no more rungs to climb for me. So when I decided, I enjoyed what I did. Now I have to go back to some of the roots of who I am as an individual. So curiosity started to kick in again. And I started to explore many startups. So here I was, right at the almost at the number 2 or number 3 position in a corporate role, walked away from it and started to explore startups in areas that are emerging. So I started to look at about 8 or 10 different startups before I picked one. And the common thread among these startups was a venture capital firm that funded a good 50% of these startups. So I ended
Right.
up meeting the same partners who I'd be engaging. So it's funny that I rejected most of these company roles, but the venture capitalist said, I don't think, Sagar, I can convince you to join these companies. Why don't you come work for me? That's how it started. And they created this role, a unique role. And it was not that they have had many roles in the past. Normally, you have general partners and investing partners, but this is an operating partner who don't have an investment decision in the companies they place their bets on or their fund, but it's mostly once they decide to fund, and it's typically hardware plays. So they have to get someone like me involved and say, is this the right mode to scale a company? Do you make or do you buy some of these components? Do you have your own factories? Do you go to somebody else? How do you size up this opportunity as you scale? What's the cost curve going to be? How do you price this opportunity? So that's the early stage of what I was involved with. So I did this for many years, for about 1.5 years, 2 years. And then I started towards the end, I said, it's okay to sit on the sidelines and give advice to these companies, founders, or your operating partners. I eventually want to do something on my own. That's when I decided enough is enough. I've got to go off and step and started to get into my own startup that I ran. And I became a CEO, and I took it to an exit and got it to profitability. So that's kind of my journey through the venture firm, which got me into a thought process of how startups work, how they scale, what ticks, what doesn't tick, and you think if you're ready for it, that's when I jumped out. In fact,
This is really unique because I think it's the higher order of compliment that a VC firms is offering you jobs in multiple different startups, and you're rejecting them, and they like you so much that they actually create a role for you. I mean, it's the highest
yeah,
order of compliment you can get.
I guess so. But it worked out good I think for both sides. It eventually worked out that I didn't have to stay with them to go scale up, but I did find an opportunity where I could actually make an impact.
Sagar, can you share something with us that is very unique to who you are, what you do, and what many others might not be doing in industry? And if there is something like that, why do you do it?
It's interesting you ask that, because one of the things I do is no matter what my normal work week goes through, either in corporate life or in the venture world, I try and meet one new person a week that I've not met before. And for many reasons. It doesn't have to be in the domain or the area of expertise that I'm in, but I tend to meet a new person who's thinking about an idea, the idea hasn't even gelled, but they're thinking about something, or somebody who's gone further along, the idea is gelled, they're looking at connecting with the right folks to get either funding or more advice, or somebody who's actually done a startup, who's actually gone through one piece and they're thinking about another startup. So I tend to meet these folks, and most of these folks I've not met before. Most, in fact, 90% of them I've not met before. It's a contact to a network that comes in, and they say, hey, you should meet Sagar, you should just talk to him. Most of the time, nothing comes out of it. When I say most of the time, at least 70, 80% of the time, nothing comes out of it. You make a contact to them, you meet somebody else, but your network is informally growing. It's growing to a point where you tend to connect other dots of these folks that you meet. So
Right.
I enjoy this because two things I do this. A reason I enjoy it primarily because I'm a touchy-feely guy. I'm not much of a bookworm. I don't read much. I have to meet people. That's the only way I learn. There are pieces that come together when you meet people. It's the personality, it's their backgrounds, it's why they want to do something. All these pieces don't come together when you read a book. It's the emotion around connecting with people. I get immense satisfaction doing that. And I continue to do that today as well.
So you've had a very unique career, corporate life, startups, VC. Tell us a little, how do you balance your corporate life and entrepreneurship passion and needs?
It's not easy, Rachna. I think it's something that I had to practice very hard. It was very difficult during my initial years in my career. It was always moving up the ladder to middle management, getting to the next broader role. Once you get bored with a certain opportunity, you try to expand your role. So I was literally doing that for the first 10 years of my career. So there was no balance. It was always one way. How far can you get to with what you got? It almost like time was working against me in my first 10 years, that there was an artificial barrier of time. If I don't get to this place in 10 years, I may not get to where I need to get. Like I said, spending time away from corporate world into meeting people, getting ideas going through, which I talked about, I think those things keep me interested in new technologies, new engagements, or so. So I got into a private company board very early in my career. That got me exposed to a very different way of thinking, both in the investment side and the technology partners, as well as the advisors, very different the community folks. I started to enjoy that. So I started to carve out time. And I had actually got approvals from my corporate, for the company I was working at, to engage on the board. They got me approval to do that. Then it said, it's not that difficult. Folks say you can't be having conflicting, roles in where you're working and spending time. As long as your job gets done, as long as you're creating that time over weekends or late in the evenings, it doesn't really matter. But having the transparency with the companies, with the people you work for or work with, I think is very important. By the time I joined a very large company, I was on 8 or 9 company boards and advisory groups. It's funny that this conversation is coming because the biggest conversation point with this large company I joined was not about my compensation, was about how many company boards I'm involved with. And it's very interesting you asked that, because my offer letter had just 2 paragraphs on my compensation. The rest of the 2 pages are all the specific company boards I was involved with, and I had to be open and transparent with that. The other part is it's interesting I bring this up, but having a family that allows this to happen. Constantly, they're saying, are you stretching yourself? You're putting in a good 8-10 hour day on a normal work day, and you're finding time to go off and do this stuff. So I actually have to sneak out after they've gone to bed to go spend some time meeting somebody and come back, or I do it before they wake up and come back. So juggling this, it was actually an art, because I have to figure out, they're going to be up at 7 a.m. I better do my coffee at 6 and get back home by 6:45 so I can enjoy breakfast. So I was doing some of these things. So it was good. I enjoyed it while I can. I'm still doing it. So.
Sagar, this is a question very close to my heart. What kind of impact do you want to leave on this world? And is India going to be center stage in that impact, knowing that you've come from India and you talked about it very fondly, in the beginning of the interview?
Rachna, this topic in question is very, very, very personal to me. The reason I bring it up is I'm not deliberately trying to leave any substantial impact or having any aha moments with defining why somebody should do it the way Sagar did or something else. But let me walk you through some background. I think it'll get you some context.
Okay.
See, I'm passionate about what I like to do myself, and I get some influence, and the influence is typically from peers. It's not from folks much older than me, because they're kind of out of context in time. Mm-hmm. If you know what I mean. They get wisdom, you get wisdom from them, but they don't quite get directionalities to where you should go. So I respect them for where they are. I put them in their bucket, right? I learned from my peers. Right? So my base education was in India. It was a very rich one. My entire education was almost free. I hardly had to pay anything to get to a premier educational institute in India. And I felt like, boy, there's nothing else for me left there for me to do in India. I had to leave. In fact, I got into a premier business management school in India. I remember my father telling me, Sagar, I think you have to move on. Even though today people would really crave for such an offering in India. So I moved on. But the point is, I wanted to come back and give something back to India. I've attempted to do many startups in India, engage with many. In fact, one of the electric scooter companies, that's what got me getting back into India. So what I want to do is try to bring back things that India should have invested in decades ago, which is manufacturing. We've got a labor force that's very educated. I don't think India labor force today, at least in the days, it does not have the discipline. You have to depend on a lot of manual labor to get things done.
Right.
Most of the time it works well. Knowing how Indians are, they're very creative. There's jugaad in every single Indian. They'll find creative ways of doing things done. That doesn't bode well for manufacturing. You got to be consistent. There's a
Right.
reason why certain countries are so good at manufacturing. Okay, it's not just fear. It's just that the DNA is just do it the same way over and over again. Now with the automation coming into play, I think, and with the minor element of labor and the majority of automation, you could start to bring a lot of manufacturing back into India. So I'm really driving a lot of programs to plant some seeds into bringing semiconductor manufacturing into India. We got to figure out what that exactly means. Is it a large wafer fab? Is it something in assembly and test? Is something in different areas? But some aspects of manufacturing I'd like to bring back to India. So I'm spending quite a bit of time, along with some, I've got approvals from my company to go spend time to go do this. So I'm actually engaging with companies to go think through how to get the infrastructure going for setting up large factories in India.
That would be so interesting to learn about what you're doing, what you've done, when you're ready to share more about that. But this
Absolutely.
is really exciting to hear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
This has been so much fun, Sagar, and so much learning for me as well. Do you have any other messages for our readers?
I do. It may not be a message, but in summary, I'll say one has to take a holistic approach to any practice, either in investing or embarking on any founding idea. And then just should not feel worried or afraid of failing or quitting early. So between my corporate life and the venture world and my personal engagements, I've been involved with nearly 20 companies over time. 20 companies, very, very close.
Right.
Out of the 20 companies, 10 of them were not successful. Out of 10 of them, 4 of them, I didn't survive myself. I did not survive myself. Either they said, Sagar, I think you're asking for too much. I think we can't create this role for you. I think you got to figure out what you want to do next. Right. So I think folks should not be afraid of, especially they got to be very comfortable in their own skin. Mm-hmm. But then again, when you decide on something, it's got to be holistic. You got to know where your personal life is and where your career you want to go. You can't just take one path or the other. Most folks tend to take one path or the other. You can do that for the first 5 to 7 years of a career because you're really trying to amp up and get to the highest point you can and get the experience level, right? So making mistakes is okay. Also, the other part is collectively staying with people who genuinely give you true advice. And advice doesn't have to be always good. It's okay for them to give you advice that you don't want to hear. So people you engage with matters a lot. Meet a lot of people. The only thing I bring back is you meet as many people as you can because everybody's story is different. There's no 2 stories that are similar. And then learn to stick it out when you can. Learn to quit early when you can. Right. So I think I've embraced this phrase, and I can say, when things are not going well, I can always say, this too shall pass. Because you got to figure out if you're working for the company, if you're working for the idea, or you're working for the manager. So I think it's important. If you're working for the wrong manager, this too shall pass. Don't worry about it. So.
Very, very wise words, I would say. Thank you so much for sharing this. And thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you.